When we take creatine, high doses of creatine, we see elevated creatinine in the urine. And for a long time, doctors were doing urinalyses of people that were taking creatine, and they said, oh, people are damaging their kidneys because kidney damage has elevated levels of creatinine.
Dihydroberberine versus berberine. So berberine actually inhibits TMAO, that the part in the gut microbiota that is increased by carnitine. And I do take carnitine. This kind of can go into another area I wanted to talk about, which is carnitine and TMAO. So maybe we could talk about that first, I guess. But but TMAO is, you could see it as this bad thing in the gut that certain bad gut microbiota produce, and that contributes to heart disease and some other problems. And that's one of the reasons why they think red meat is not good, because it's got carnitine and increases the TMAO. Now, I like carnitine because I think it's a great mitochondrial supplement. And for me, it's just about, okay, now how do I reduce this negative effect from carnitine? So maybe you can unpack that. Carnitine, TMAO, do you take it, or do you I was thinking about taking a gram of it, by the way, and I decided not to because of TMAO. So I'm only taking 500 milligrams, even though if it wasn't for TMAO, I would take a gram. So what do you think of carnitine, TMAO, and does berberine versus dihydroberberine impact the inhibition of TMAO?
Yes, on berberine and dihydroberberine being potentially protective against that. Berberine has been shown to do that, and berberine just converts to dihydroberberine at the gut, and then at the plasma level, it converts back to berberine. But again, you're kind of skipping this bio-individual gut microbiome component to where it's just active in the gut. And therefore, you get less GI distress and those kinds of things. And then as far as TMAO being damaging or being part of the pathological process, the pathogenesis of coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease, that's a great question. I don't think it's necessarily that clear. It's almost like what it reminds me of is this is like correlation versus causation. And, for example, when we take creatine, high doses of creatine, we see elevated creatinine in the urine. And for a long time, doctors were doing urinalyses of people that were taking creatine, and they said, oh, people are damaging their kidneys because kidney damage has elevated levels of creatinine. But meanwhile, because you were taking creatine and it was just converting into creatinine and being eliminated, it was seemingly damaging your kidneys, but it's been shown to not do that at all. And this is just natural metabolism of creatine. So I do believe that we're seeing something like that take place. And I don't believe that it's this causation that's happening when you're taking carnitine supplements or eating more red meat. That is my gut feeling. I don't have proof.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think, and my preferred form of carnitine would be acetyl L-carnitine, actually.
That's what I take.
Yeah, mitochondrial form. With L-carnitine, you really need like a large dose to get across this kind of like glucose gradient, insulin gradient. Like you need like a huge dose of carbohydrate, high glycemic carbohydrate, like potentially like 75 grams of dextrose or something to make the L-carnitine more effective and be transported into the cell. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So you're saying the acetyl L-carnitine. I take acetyl L-carnitine because it more easily it gets into the brain, and I feel it more in the brain more, right? But you're saying it actually gets into the cells much better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's very important to know. I wanted to go into the TMAO a bit because I kind of had the same feeling as you. until I started to read these Mendelian randomization studies, which I would highly recommend. Which I would highly recommend that you do, because it's part of my process now. When you're looking at a marker, whether it's creatinine, you could do Mendelian randomization, look up studies on creatinine. You'll see there's no correlation between the genetic predisposition of higher levels and any kind of disease, pretty much. But what scared me about TMAO is that these Mendelian randomizations are finding that there's causal, in terms of TMAO and some kind of issue, right? Which means that.
So one thing that I would add there, though, Joe, that there's correlations on top of correlations. Like one thing that happened where we ended up villainizing high sodium or high red meat was that people that were eating those diets were having ultra processed food and high glycemic carbohydrate and having, inflammatory vegetable oils in their diets. And then we were villainizing salt, and we were villainizing high fat, and we were villainizing high cholesterol and all these things. Whereas when we take those out of the ultra processed bucket and we're just having high sodium or high protein or high fat, we don't see that. So
right.
That
so the thing,
watch out.
So the with the Mendelian randomization is an independent variable, because what they're doing is they're taking a genetic predisposition, which is independent of other variables, and they're looking, okay, if you have a genetic predisposition for higher TMAO, regardless of what else you're eating, what else you're doing, it's not completely independent, because it could be, for example, picking up something like people who are eating more meat. Maybe, for example, some people might have a tendency to eat more meat, and that's why they have higher TMAO. But what they are picking up is it is an independent variable to a large degree, where people who have a genetic predisposition for increased TMAO, maybe because they're converting it better or whatever it is, they're finding that there is some negative impacts. And I think it's just one of the things that, in health, there's a lot of opportunities for cognitive dissonance, where something could be good in 20 ways and it could be bad in one. And I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that, as in like, it's got to be good in every way, right? It cannot be bad.
Totally. And
so
this goes back to, I love that you bring this up, because there can be signaling that happens that's very much needed of damage on a lighter level. This goes back to like that idea of hormesis. And when you have, for example, berberine or dihydroberberine, people say, oh, it stresses the mitochondria. We've seen that. Okay, it does. And there's a certain dose that's actually ideal. That ideal stress is mitohormesis, and we're actually seeing it increase biogenesis, mitochondrial biogenesis. So we're actually seeing it enhance mitochondrial function. We're seeing it enhance mitochondrial number, because it's potentially stressing it to a light degree. So it's really fascinating.